Around 2,500 years ago, the ancient Greek philosophers Democritus and Leucippus argued that if you take any physical thing and divide it, and you keep going and going, you will eventually come to a stopping point, and you will reach the tiniest, indivisible, fundamental part of reality. And they called this the atom. They said that the world was made up of atoms and empty space, and in doing so, they provided a mechanistic understanding of reality, which we now call metaphysics. And they did this using pure reason and logic, without recourse to a god or gods. They were followed not long after by Epicurus. Now, he was also what we would term an atomist. He reasoned that if we are made up of atoms, then our soul, our sense of self, our consciousness is also made up of atoms. Therefore, when we die, so does the soul. There is no afterlife. When we pass away, eventually the atoms that make us up are dispersed back into the universe. Now that might all sound rather bleak, but if we look at a text on Epicurus, we can see that he offered a comforting perspective. Death is nothing to us, since while we exist, our death is not. And when our death occurs, we do not exist. What Epicurus meant by this was that death is not a thing in of itself. It is the lack of life. It is the end of experience, the end of consciousness. It is something that can't be sensed, and therefore death is something not to be feared. We can admire Greek philosophers for being able to shed light on reality in such a meaningful way, despite not having tools to investigate it thoroughly. However, they didn't get everything right. For example, Epicurus believed that our soul was made up of a different type of atom. Furthermore, Hindu, Buddhist and Islamic traditions, as well as others, also had concepts of the atom, some of which were inspired by the Greeks. Let's fast forward to 1805, and the British chemist John Dalton formulated a modern conception of the atom, and this was some 2,300 years after the time of Democritus. And it turns out that atoms aren't indivisible. We now know that they themselves are made up of smaller parts called subatomic particles. It was another 100 years before we could look at atoms in detail, and this was dependent upon the discovery of X-rays. These technological advancements set the stage for the molecular revolution in biology, and that's what I'm going to talk about next. And if this sounds of interest to you, then please follow along for more.